Thanksgiving Eve, 1971. A man in a dark suit and sunglasses buys a $20 ticket in Portland under a false name, Dan Cooper. Hours later he has hijacked a Boeing 727, collected $200,000 in cash and 4 parachutes, and then, somewhere over the forests of Washington state, at night, in a storm, he opens the rear stairway and jumps. Nobody ever saw him again. It remains the only unsolved air piracy case in the history of the United States. This is the Mystery Archive, D.B. Cooper. The most famous heist that nobody ever solved, investigated by the FBI for 45 years across more than 1,000 suspects. Today I lay out exactly what happened, the physical evidence that survives, and why the case is still open. Open the file with me. First, the man. He gave his name as Dan Cooper. A press error later turned it into D.B. Cooper, and the wrong name is the one that stuck. Witnesses described him as calm, polite, well-dressed, around 40 to 45 years old. He ordered a bourbon and soda. He paid his tab. He tipped. Flight attendants later said he was the least frightening hijacker imaginable. He apologized for the inconvenience. The method was precise. Shortly after takeoff he handed a note to a flight attendant. She assumed it was a phone number and pocketed it without reading. He leaned in and said, quietly, "You had better look at that note, I have a bomb." He opened his briefcase just enough to show red cylinders and wires. Then he stated his demands with no drama. $200,000 in $20 bills, 4 parachutes, and a fuel truck ready in Seattle. And here is the first detail that suggests expertise. He asked for 4 parachutes, 2 main and 2 reserve. Investigators believe that was deliberate. By requesting extras, he made it impossible for authorities to sabotage the gear, because they would have to assume he might strap a hostage to one of them. It is the move of someone who thought several steps ahead. In Seattle, the demands were met. The 36 passengers were released in exchange for the money and the parachutes. Cooper kept the pilots and 1 flight attendant on board. Then he gave a very specific set of flight instructions. Head for Mexico City, stay below 10,000 feet, keep the landing gear down, the flaps at 15 degrees, and hold airspeed under 200 knots. Every one of those parameters is exactly what you would specify to make a parachute jump survivable from a jet. Around 8 p.m., somewhere between Seattle and Reno, the crew felt a pressure change. Cooper had lowered the rear air stair of the 727, a feature only that aircraft had, and stepped out into the dark. It was raining. The temperature at altitude was around -7 degrees Celsius, and the wind chill at 200 knots was brutal. He was wearing a business suit and loafers. He carried the money in a bank bag. The manhunt was enormous. The FBI codenamed it Norjack, for Northwest hijacking. Ground searches swept the presumed drop zone for weeks. Submarines searched Lake Merwin. Over 45 years, agents examined more than 1,000 suspects and thousands of tips. And they found essentially nothing. No body, no parachute, no bag, no clear fingerprint that led anywhere. Then, in 1980, the case cracked open and closed again. An 8-year-old boy named Brian Ingram, digging in the sand on a beach along the Columbia River at Tena Bar, uncovered 3 bundles of decaying $20 bills. Nearly $6,000. And the serial numbers matched the ransom exactly. It is the only piece of the money ever recovered. And that discovery raised more questions than it answered. Tena Bar is not where the FBI believed Cooper jumped. The bills were still bundled with rubber bands, which suggests they had not been tumbling loose in the river for years. Some geologists argued the sand layer above them indicated the money arrived there years after the hijacking. Every explanation for how that cash got to that beach creates a contradiction somewhere else. The physical evidence that survives is thin but tantalizing. Cooper left behind his black clip-on tie, found on the seat. Decades later, researchers analyzing the tie under electron microscopes found particles of rare metals and alloys, including titanium, along with traces of materials used in industrial and aerospace manufacturing. That fed a strong theory: Cooper may have worked in the aerospace industry, which would also explain his precise knowledge of the 727. So who was he? Over the decades, the leading suspects have included a Boeing employee, a paratrooper veteran, a Canadian with the same name as a French comic book hero called Dan Cooper, a pilot character, notably, whose adventures included parachuting. That comic was popular in Canada and France but not in the United States, which some read as a hint about Cooper's background. Every candidate has been argued for and every candidate has been ruled out or left unproven. In 2016, after 45 years, the FBI officially suspended the investigation, redirecting resources to active cases. They kept the physical evidence available for legitimate researchers. That closure was not a solution, it was an admission. The most famous hijacking in American history simply outlasted the agency's patience. The central question remains: did he survive? The FBI's own position leaned toward no. Jumping into a stormy night, in a suit, over dense forest, at that temperature, with a parachute he could not steer well, into terrain nobody could pinpoint, the odds are terrible. And the fact that not a single one of the remaining bills ever surfaced in circulation, in over 5 decades, supports the idea that the money went into the ground or the water with him. But the counter-argument is just as strong. If he died on impact, where is the body? Where is the parachute, the bag, the briefcase? A jump zone was searched exhaustively. Aircraft debris and human remains are usually found eventually in such searches. And the man who planned the flaps setting and the airspeed and the extra parachutes was clearly not improvising. Someone that prepared may have prepared the landing too. We should also note what makes this case culturally unique. Cooper became a folk hero. He hurt nobody. He was polite to the crew. He took money from an airline, not from people. In the America of 1971, Vietnam, distrust of institutions, economic anxiety, a calm man who outsmarted the system and vanished into the night was practically a myth waiting to happen. There are songs, films, festivals, and an entire amateur research community devoted to him. And the hijacking changed aviation forever. After Cooper, Boeing installed what is literally called the Cooper vane, a mechanical latch that prevents the rear air stair of a 727 from being opened in flight. Airport screening tightened dramatically in the years that followed. Every time you walk through security today, part of that procedure traces back to a polite man in a dark suit who jumped out of a plane in 1971. The scoreboard of facts. Confirmed. The hijacking happened on November 24, 1971. Cooper collected $200,000 and 4 parachutes and jumped from a Boeing 727 in flight. Roughly $6,000 of the ransom was found at Tena Bar in 1980. His tie survives and carries rare metal particles. The FBI suspended the case in 2016 after examining over 1,000 suspects. All documented. Still open, everything that matters. Who he was. Whether he lived. Where he landed. How the money reached that beach. And why not one other bill has ever appeared. 5 decades, one of the largest manhunts in FBI history, and the answer is still a blank space where a name should be. My verdict for this file: D.B. Cooper is the perfect crime not because it was brilliant, but because it was clean. No violence, no accomplices, no bragging, no trail. Whoever he was, he took the one thing an investigator needs most, a person to look for, and stepped out into the dark with it. The most haunting possibility is not that he escaped. It is that he died within minutes, alone in a forest, and the ground simply kept him. It is worth walking through the flight itself, because the detail is remarkable. Flight 305 was a short hop, Portland to Seattle, about 30 minutes. Cooper chose it deliberately, a 727, half-empty, on a holiday eve, with a rear stairway. During the negotiation, he never raised his voice. He let the passengers off without incident. He even offered to have meals brought aboard for the crew. Everything about his conduct suggests someone who had rehearsed the scenario many times in his head. And the money itself was a trap the FBI set. All $10,020 bills were photographed and their serial numbers recorded before handover, one of the largest such records ever compiled. That list was distributed to banks across the country and remained active for decades. Any attempt to spend that cash in bulk would have surfaced. The fact that it never did is either evidence he died, or evidence of extraordinary discipline. There is one more physical clue worth mentioning. Along with the tie, investigators recovered cigarette butts Cooper left behind, 8 of them, of a brand called Raleigh. That should have been a DNA goldmine. But at some point over the decades, the butts were lost from evidence storage. It is one of the most painful losses in the case. The single item that modern forensics could most easily have used simply vanished from an FBI field office. And there is a final possibility researchers take seriously, that Cooper never intended to survive as a rich man, only to vanish. Some profilers argue the level of preparation combined with the recklessness of the jump points to a man who was desperate, terminally ill, or indifferent to the outcome. In that reading, the $200,000 was never the point. Disappearing was. And you? Do you think Cooper survived the jump, or died that night? And how do you explain the money at 10 a bar? Leave your verdict in the comments. Subscribe and hit the bell, a new mystery every day, and a full file every week. The archive never really closes.